Give me that ukulele. Give me a pick. Lord, I think I got something to say.
Hello, I'm Peter Bell, and I'm here with Mr. Tim Marsh from Bell Copper. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Peter.
Wonderful to be talking with you. Time flies. It's June in 2019, and work continues for Bell in Arizona.
Yep, we're still facing a porphyry copper deposit at Perseverance.
Wonderful. And this is the newly named Perseverance Project, formerly CABA, and all kinds of history there that we've been into before. Can you tell us a little bit about the name change?
Well, our new exploration optionee has decided that since the ore body has persevered from being discovered for so long, that we would name the project Perseverance.
And is it specifically because it's been so long that it's avoided being? Is that the angle there?
That's the company line.
I wondered if it was about the perseverance of yourself, with searching for it.
Yeah, that's a side story, but mainly it's this giant porphyry copper deposit that somehow has evaded 20 attempts to discover it.
Well, it's the reality of minerals exploration, isn't it? The years
Yep.
and years that go into the hunt for these exceptional copper deposits around the world. Copper, integral part of global economy, and to be working on in Arizona, the USA here, very important.
Yeah, just as a point of interest, Oyu Tolgoi waited until the 135th drill hole to reveal itself.
And I believe that was a fairly deep deep hole, wasn't it?
Yep, that's right.
How is the reception and the sentiment in Arizona for yourself being there and other travels around the world that you might be making there? How's the pulse feeling?
Well, there's a disconnect between people in the industry and the metal, global metal market. That disconnect being that none of the mines are producing higher grade ore than they did yesterday. The grades fall in the major operations. Resources dwindle. They're being mined every day. New discoveries aren't being made. So that line, that situation is understood by people in the industry. The market is heavily soured by the trade conflict between the U.S. and China.
Yep.
But it doesn't really reflect the supply-demand fundamentals of copper.
I've heard it said that it's one of the most cash-poor markets for the juniors, at the same time as being one of the most aggressive times for the major mining companies.
That sounds about right to me. It's a difficult time to raise money, we've found. So we're dealing with it. We've dealt with that for a long time, and just sucking it in and waiting for
tighten the belt and
yep.
And thinking back to last year and the other side of having a partner on this project, I watched
Yep.
as the former partner left there, and all kinds of questions raised by that, and then to see who's come in. It's just been an amazing story, a testament to dedication and the vision required, really, to chase these elephants.
Yeah, I've got a quote from some of the geologists working for our former joint venture partner out there when they saw our core from K20 at Roundup last winter, and that was, "Oh shit." Realizing that they hadn't finished the job that they should have.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? There's a lot of fortunes made and fortunes lost, and ego crashed on the rocks of the junior mining minerals exploration business, the history of it all. And again, being in Arizona, I think I look forward to that, watching that state through my life, being a major source of mining activity for the US domestically, and looking at what's happened with all the oil and gas activities and holding out hope for copper in Arizona. Been very impressed with some of the talk of ISR copper there and Excelsior Mining, and you guys too. I just to mention the conceptual model that you have with the discovery process that you're working towards here. Any changes, any new insight for you on a technical basis?
Well, we've gotten much closer to the thing we're chasing. One of the things we were able to do in K20 that we haven't done in the past was to run the downhole televiewer.
Yep.
And that device was able to image pyrite veins, D veins, in the wall of the hole, and they consistently had a northeasterly dip. So we know which way the juice is coming from. It's coming from green undrilled pastures to the northeast of K20, an area where we have neither geophysical data nor drill data nor outcrops. So it's a place we've got to go, and so the focus now is to get new geophysical data to help make sure we're drilling in the right spot. It may end up being just a deflection out of the side of K20 to get to that location if it's 200 meters to the northeast of us, or maybe a new collar if it's 500 or 600 meters to the northeast of us. But we're talking in terms of just a few hundred meters. We won't be making any kilometer scale step outs.
Well, this is it. I think back to some of our conversations, Tim, and hearing you talk about the multiple kilometer or the initial step outs, right? With your first holes here. It's legendary stuff.
Kilometer and a half to start with. And
oh, Lord.
Kind of settled down into roughly 800 meter step outs, but we can't do that again without risk of actually stepping across it, but we haven't stepped across it yet.
Wonderful. That's a good problem to have. I'm glad that the problem is changing, as it does. And it's good to also hear, no fundamental revisions or changes to your concept of what the deposit could be. Although I'm sure that has the potential to change as you get into it, right? Up until there's a sense of what it might be, where it might be, with this slip, large displacement concepts at play, but the geochemistry and everything else like that could still present surprises.
Yeah, we got one of those in K20, and that was, it's a tiny occurrence on the scale of what we hit at K20. We hit somewhere around 600 meters of 0.05% copper, which that it just doesn't strike anyone who's a copper miner as anything very interesting. But if you're a copper explorer, that's a very anomalous sort of an occurrence. We've hit intersections of that scale in K11 and K12. K11 is about 2.7 kilometers away, and I regard all three of the intersections, K11, K12, and K20, as just smoke drifting away from the thing that we're looking for. If you connect, and I can't talk about resources. We got nothing to talk about resources. We don't have grades that are approaching something that's economic. But as an explorationist, I have to understand what does that represent in terms of how much metal nature put into that rock. If I put a loop around K11, K12, K20, and fill that loop with 400 or 500 ppm of copper, and then went out to try and replicate that by buying copper somewhere and dumping it into the ground, I would have to drain what's currently in the LME 10 times to buy enough copper and sprinkle it out there in the ground to make an anomaly of the size we've discovered. Okay, it's not ore. It's a geochemical anomaly, but it's a 4 billion pound geochemical anomaly.
Yeah.
Nobody will ever mine it. Yeah, nobody will ever mine it. It's smoke. But I contend that there is a fire that is generating that smoke, and that's the thing we want to find. It's off to the northeast of K20. We haven't found it yet, but it's there. It's there to be found. I don't have a clue what the grade will be. But part of what we saw in K20, just a very bizarre occurrence, but that is linked to the mineralization process, was a 30 centimeter carbonatite dike. So that's an igneous rock that is made out of calcium carbonate. Most every place on Earth, if you find calcium carbonate, it's the product of biological activity in the ocean. But in rare places, the mantle of the Earth generates magma that is made out of calcite, and it squirts to the surface occasionally, and makes carbonatite volcanoes. They commonly have very high phosphorus content, very high rare earth element concentrations. In the case of one notable one in Africa, a very high copper content that's mined by Rio Tinto at Palabora. Just seeing one of these dikes in K20, we've drilled so few holes. Really, we haven't gone out there and turned over every stone. We've drilled a couple of very widely separated holes, and we found this thing that just traditionally you won't see it in any porphyry copper model. If you read about what's a porphyry copper deposit, it'll say carbonatite nowhere in there. That's a completely different geological beast. But what it demonstrates at Perseverance is that there is a plumbing system that goes from where we're drilling all the way down into the Earth's mantle, where carbonatite magmas can be generated. And when you start removing material from the mantle, your chances of having higher than typical base metal grades is there. And it's one of the things our former optionee on the project likes to see globally in their porphyry copper deposits, and that's unusually high concentrations of metals that clearly came from the mantle, like platinum and palladium, and chromium and nickel. Even though they're porphyry copper deposits, if they show a higher than typical contribution of metals out of the mantle, that's something the big guys like to see. Well, we've clearly got a link straight into the mantle with this carbonatite dike. Who knows where it leads? We know it dips to the northeast. It's a skinny little crack filled with carbonatite magma that came from northeast of K20, the same direction that the copper veins are inclined, and so I think we'll end up opening up a treasure box when we finally get to the place we're looking for.
And thank you for saying it. Before you had mentioned the geologists who you met in January at Roundup, and I wonder, they didn't see this carbonatite dike, did they?
No, that was encountered. Actually, we drilled that after Roundup. We shut the drill down just after New Year's to kind of regroup and think about what we were seeing. It was pretty clear there were chalcopyrite veinlets with a younger phase of enrichment to bornite chalcocite, some thin potassic envelopes around veinlets. It became very clear this is a very bad place to be stopping a hole, so we fired the drill up after Roundup again and pushed it another almost 300 meters deeper, and eventually got to the place where we had to call it quits. It was either upgrade our drill to a bigger drill, or just call it deep enough right there for the time being. We've still got the drill sitting on the hole. We could get back into that hole. We could deepen it. We could wedge it. We've talked about both possibilities. Right now, we think that if the system is shaped like a carrot and we're on one side, it would probably be better to discover it by drilling into the middle of the carrot rather than sliding into the deep side of the carrot. It's quite likely, I think, still that the system, the copper-bearing heart of the system that we haven't found yet, makes it all the way up to the paleo surface. Out where we're drilling, that's about 200 meters below surface. So we want to get into that environment with the next hole, with the hope that, like our former partner was exploring for, that the hope that copper shell has been upgraded by supergene enrichment and has given us a chalcocite blanket. If we can find that first, I think everybody will be a little more impressed with what we've found.
Well, and people will understand your new partner and why they made the decision they did. They're not in the books of having made too many mistakes. Well, or maybe they have too, right? Depending who you ask, which set of evidence you choose to reference, I guess, right?
Yeah, a number of times they've followed on the heels of very well-financed majors who have all the resources at their disposal, the best people in the world, the best machines and technological advances of the world, and they haven't played their cards right, and Friedland's people have come in and made very significant discoveries. We hope they're going to do that again.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I wasn't aware that they had done that and kind of come in Picasso in a dustbin type scenario, or leftovers that other people had given up on, other majors. That's an important kind of exploration, speculation opportunity. Yep. Not many people can afford to undertake that kind of that kind of work, as evidenced, by the option agreement that you guys have here for them for Perseverance. It's not unreasonable, but it's a fair amount of heavy lifting for them for Cordoba as a junior, as I understand it.
Yep, their links back to HPX and Friedland's Ivanhoe mines is that's the deep pockets that once geology begins to reveal itself, the assets or the capabilities of Ivanhoe mines and HPX can be brought to bear and ought to be able to move this thing along a lot faster than Bell has.
Well, and to that, can I ask, for the people out there who don't believe that you've really been working on one hole for all this time, and who suspect that maybe you've been doing more drilling and you haven't told the market, or this or that or the other thing, is this, your news flow is up to date and comprehensive, as I understand it?
Yeah, it is. One thing that's pretty clear: the people that have spouted off out in the ether, they might have drilled a 200-meter hole in crystalline Precambrian basement out in the Canadian Shield, and you can do one of those in a day with some good French Canadian diamond drillers. You start putting a diamond drill into busted up basin and range rocks, and you drill a lot of 30-centimeter runs, and you start drilling 30-centimeter runs 3,000 feet below the surface. You don't get very much rock drilled in a day. It's tough drilling. We've got really good drillers. We got deep hole drillers. They know what they're doing. But when nature only delivers up, we had a lot of 15-centimeter runs, 30-centimeter runs. You just don't make these big footage days.
Oh God, I'm sorry to hear it. I didn't know it was that slow going, but I'm glad you did, and obviously you are too. I'm sure you would have loved to drill more in some situations, but turning the drill back on after January and these hard fought gains that you've been able to book here, well done.
We have good people doing good work. Mother Nature is not the nicest lady.
Can I ask about wedge holes? Thinking about the 3 dimensions of a carrot, and coming in from the side or from above, or wedge it. Do they ever? I always think about kind of wedging off in one planar axis, but I guess you could kind of pivot, 45 degrees or something like that to kind of offset in your wedges. Do people ever do that?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. We can certainly pick any azimuth we want, and we can
on a wedge you can.
We can point it north or south or northeast, anything in between, and before you set that wedge, you make sure your tool face is properly oriented.
Thanks. That's what I was asking. Yeah. And wondering about that in terms of drill hole planning, right? And if you thought you were coming on the edges of the carrot and you wanted to be able to not just wedge off, into the center of the carrot, but across the edges of it in some way too. It's a lot of work getting down there and figuring out what is what, right?
Yep. Yep, we can absolutely do that. We can, we can start deep in the hole and set a wedge to the northeast. We can then come up from that wedge, set another wedge off to the northeast, come up above that one, and send a hole off to the east northeast. And you can make multiple deflections out of the same mother hole in different azimuths and with different inclinations.
Ooh, I can only imagine.
A lot of value out of that first hole.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to hear you talking about that, right? Because with deep drilling and big targets, really capitalizing on that, some of those mothers is important.
Yep.
Glad to hear you showing that, you guys are continuing to do things at a very high level here in terms of possible exploration work plans and all this.
Yeah, we can do it. We've got the guys that have done it at Resolution, and it's not quite in our backyard, but the technology and the people flow out of there, and bring their skills to the little guys like Bill.
And I see mention in the May 2019 news release of magnetotellurics, also other geophysical monsters in the background at this project potentially. Any comments on all of that stuff?
Yeah, as part of the prior optionees surveying of the property, they collected, in addition to induced polarization, which showed a very large chargeability anomaly out from K11 eastward to K20. Or actually, not to K20 because they didn't go out that far, but they saw this IP chargeability anomaly. They also ran magnetotellurics, and really unbeknownst to me, they detected a large magnetotelluric anomaly, which is electrical conductivity anomaly. So somewhere out in the basement in the Precambrian rocks, which shouldn't be conductive at all, they found a very large electrically conductive mass having the sorts of dimensions of the football, a kilometer wide and at least I think we can probably see about 2 kilometers north-south of this thing, with most of it extending out of the area where they ran geophysics. So an anomaly on the edge of the survey. They never followed up to find out where it went or how big it was. They
didn't tell you, which also sounds like a bit of a mistake there. Excuse me.
That's it. I found out about it because we shared the model. And it's a software that I can't afford to buy. It's over $100,000 software program, but the data was contained in that program. Just happened that the HPX people, our partners now, or Cordoba's parent company, had the software, had the ability to get in and manipulate the model, and they started making slices through it. And they say, "Hey, Tim, what's this thing down here just under sea level? This giant anomaly." And you're drilling K20 right in the middle of it. I was like, what are you talking about? I'd never seen that thing before, and it's pretty exciting. So while we were getting real intriguing intersections in K20, seeing the core come out with these big D veins in it, we were also finding that, hey, there is a significant geophysical anomaly that looks like the target we were looking for. Probably big sheeted sulfide veins are forming the conductivity high. Maybe some phyllic type alteration that's making the conductivity high. But out where we're drilling, it's simply an extrapolation of where the measurements were actually made. We don't know if it is really right under K20 or off to the northeast or somewhere else. So, but we really need to complete the survey that the former optionee started. Find out where its edges are to the east and to the north. And it's quite likely that anomaly comes much closer to the paleo surface, maybe all the way to the paleo surface underneath the gravel, somewhere other than K20. And if we can get started in that area, that's where the next hole ought to go.
And the paleo surface in that area, is it kind of dipping to the northeast as well, or
it gets shallower to the northeast?
It gets shallower.
If you go 3 miles northeast of us, well outside of where the target is, the bedrock comes to surface. So if you take
Oh, really?
200 meters, if you take 200 meters at K20 and bring that up to surface 3 miles away, we've got a gradual shallowing of the cover, the gravel cover, to the northeast. So as we move further northeast, things should come closer to surface.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. I know that the angles on these large regional kind of features, well, local features geologically, anyways, the angles on these things are very subtle and important and contentious in some circles. The water water testing and the indications of copper minerals around water, groundwater in the area. How does that fit in with the depth to paleo surface and potential depth to copper zones?
Yeah, that's a perceptive question. We haven't explained the water anomaly. The water is, chemically very chemically complex. It's got lots of sulfur in it, as sulfate. It's got lots of fluorine in it, and we can't explain that anomalous groundwater composition. Groundwater starts at about 750 feet, a little over 200 meters below surface, and it's just nothing you would want to drink. It's got enough fluorine, enough arsenic, enough sulfate to get you real sick. We also saw copper and molybdenum in that water, and we just, from K20, we haven't found rock that would produce a groundwater of that composition. So there's something nearby that has strongly affected the groundwater composition. That is, the best candidate for that is the zone we're looking for, coming up to the paleo surface where it can interact with, modern groundwater, become oxygenated, become acidic, dissolve sulfate into solution, and the fluorine from the fluorite that we find, and the metal, the copper and the molybdenum that we saw in the water. So,
and I wonder
there's something else out there.
Well, and the carbonatite too, I wonder if that's a little bit more of a soluble rock type or would leach out stuff more so than some of the other hosts.
Yeah, I would expect so. You hit that with acid and it will dissolve much more easily than your average granitic rock.
And that really was a surprise, wasn't it? The carbonatite. And is there any? Does it have a unique geophysical kind of signature in any way that you might be able to track down? It's
not that I can think of.
Yeah, I know.
It's just it's a flyer. It's so bizarre. But one thing that is very clear is it demonstrates we've got a pipeline down into the mantle. You can't make carbonatite magmas up in the crust. It comes from very deep, and that access to metals that are enriched in the mantle to the volume that we're drilling is what's made clear by that carbonatite dike. There's a direct connection, a direct pipeline for fluid to move up that crack, fluid, potentially ore fluid. That's what we're looking for.
Yep, certainly. Well, and thank you for the diagram in the recent news there as well, showing the magnetotellurics survey. And for people who would be curious what that is that just a big pulse of electricity going into the ground?
The source of the electricity is all natural, but that image represents how conductive the Earth is to electricity. So if you were to plug a wire into the Earth, all those areas around the margins of the diagram where the colors are blues and greens, well, electricity just won't go into there. They're dry crystalline rocks. Nothing will go in. But in that magenta region, if you plug a wire into there, electricity will flow through there. Not a lot, not like another copper wire, but it is conductive. It's electrically conductive, and that's unusual. That's very unusual for the kinds of rocks we're drilling, for them to be electrically conductive. The way you explain it is by having a lot of sulfide veins, sheeted sulfide veins, or a lot of phyllosilicate, mica type alteration that's commonly associated with porphyry copper deposits. So we think we're seeing a geophysical response of the size of body that we're looking for.
And I haven't heard any mention of Typhoon around Bell.
Typhoon is a tool that HPX, Cordoba's major shareholder, brings to the equation. It is very deep penetrating, really powerful, and a great way of delimiting the distribution of sulfides in the surface, particularly in the deep surface. We may well be blinded by shallow sulfides, So right now the idea is to use a system that will allow us to see the deeper roots of where the sulfides are coming from. Previous option E found sulfides over square kilometers from K11 out to K15 and K18, and just over a very large area. There's a huge IP anomaly there. Typhoon might just light that up like a light bulb, and we might not get the best image of the deeper part of the system. Magnetotellurics will give us that kind of a cleaner look, integrating the shallow and the deep, I think, a little better. It's also logistically a lot simpler to deploy magnetotellurics. You don't have to connect the stations. So if we put out 100 stations with magnetotellurics, that's 100 places we have to go on the ground, but we don't have to get permission or drag lines across the intervening ground. Typhoon, all the electrodes have to be interconnected.
Yeah. And off the wall, but seismic. You talk about wanting to know where the paleo surface is and what's going on at depth. I know you've done some seismic before, and it proved really helpful in advancing some of the thesis. Potential for some of that deeper up around K20?
The potential is there. It gives you a good look at the shape of the paleo surface. If there are important post-mineral faults, those would show up. My guess is right now we're going to go with something that links a little closer to mineralization and alteration, rather than just imaging that paleo surface shape. But I think if we get to mining, if we get to laying out an open pit or something like that, knowing the shape of that paleo surface is really important, and seismic reflection would be a great tool to do that.
And you'd almost want to do that before you go down drilling into that potentially. I don't know. There's so many questions about the sequencing of the work programs and everything here too, right? But for now, it's the question remains: have you put a hole in it yet? And the answer remains no.
No, we haven't. No, we've seen the smoke off to the side of it. We haven't seen the thing we're looking for, and
that's not a bad place to be, Tim. Right?
Yeah,
Is it?
Yeah. The cracks that we see, and then the cracks are running, many of them are running nearly down the length of the core. So this thing isn't laid over on its side like so many are in the basin and range. This thing is within 15 or 20 degrees of straight up and down.
And do you have a sense for why that might be? Like any local features in this bit of the area that would have really be responsible for it not tipping over further, or?
Well, I just know if you look around the area to the east of us, to the north of us, things there aren't tilted. We see the same basalt layer on up in the hills as we see down in our drill holes, and that basalt layer is flat as a pool table, where we see it forming these lava capped mesas around us. So it's in line with what we see on the surface.
And there's other areas in the Basin and Range province, right, that are much different.
Oh, yeah, laid over completely on their sides, 90 degrees of rotation. Some places even more than 90 degrees, actually back tilted a little bit. But we don't seem to be in that domain.
Do you have a sense that this kind of area in the world is getting some increased attention or anything like that?
Well, I guess activity is pretty good in Arizona. So people have I think returned, not as strongly as they could, but with South 32 down at Taylor or Hermosa, working on what I think will eventually turn out to be kind of a peripheral lead zinc zone around a giant porphyry, and at Rosemont very close to starting construction, as you mentioned, Excelsior, and a number of operations that are really getting pretty serious in Arizona. I think the spotlight will return to Arizona as a real important place for future copper pounds.
Well, and what a time to be making a discovery potentially, right? The discovery process can take years and years and years. And that's what the majors will tell you, and admit how long it can take to really demonstrate convincingly, right, that this is that this concept is that there's ore down there. It's because Lord knows sometimes they build the mines and it's not there, and the exploration work that was done, and whether it was rushed or this step was skipped or that step, it would seem that you've been taking a cautious approach here and a dedicated approach to really finding something. Again, to just ask why for perseverance.
Why have we gone slow?
Well, and why have you stuck with it? You're right. Is it?
The answer is always the footwall. Very very few miners get the ability to see what's underneath the thing they're digging on before they start digging.
Yeah.
Everybody dreams. Well, gee, what does the bottom of this thing look like? What's the source? What's the mother lode look like that's producing whatever we're mining on right here? Well, we've cheated. We've used the basin and range faulting event to get a look at the bottom before we ever started looking for the top. And the bottom is extraordinary. It's spectacular. Every geologist from whatever company that I've ever taken out there gets out on the ground and they say, "Wow, this is amazing. You should be giving training lessons to the Society of Economic Geologists out here. This is such a spectacular example of a porphyry copper deposit." And I've said it before, the early guys who drilled that root zone should have pointed their drills up. They were underneath where the copper would form. And we are now just closing in on that volume of rock that used to lie above, where all of those veins come streaming up out of the subsurface. That's the patch of ground we haven't found. It's out there, and we're closing in.
Well, and I'm hearing K20 always makes me feel good that you haven't sunk more holes into it. And that may be a weird thing for just to hear or for me to say, but I could imagine a situation 50 holes in and still not really having a sense of where or what, but there's been a lot of thinking, good thinking and good intermediary work in between each stage in each round. And so here we are in June 2019, and there's talk of extending the MT survey and then additional drilling. And this is the pace is set by Cordoba.
Yep. Yeah, and they're working. They're financing out, in a public way. Ivanhoe Mines. Their distant, I don't know, great grandparent company or something like that got funded very well from CITIC. They in turn made a loan down to HBX, who in turn made a loan down to Cordoba, and Cordoba is probably back in the situation now where we can be moving ahead, gathering this data and finding the spot for that next hole.
That CITIC story is another one of these examples. It's when that was announced, I was shocked. I believe it was almost 20 years in between the time when an agreement had first been struck and when money actually changed hands under that deal that Friedland had engineered with a Chinese entity of some kind. I was blown away to see somebody planting seeds right that deep, that it took that long to come to harvest, and really even just that initial financing, I believe, was only a first round, right? And that there was going to be more with those entities and whatever arrangement they were doing, but not like I'd never seen anything quite like that, and that it would come down, percolate through, and have some connection to this potentially in one way or another is pretty impressive stuff. And I guess you will continue to be involved at the field this year. Cordoba's going to listen to you and have you at site helping out, I hope.
That's right. Both Cordoba management and HPX management has expressed a desire to have me out on the ground. They said I can look for an assistant so I don't have to pack all the boxes of core around personally, but they would like to have my eyes out on the ground as new core comes up.
It's amazing the dedication you've had on the project in years gone by, how hard you've been working out there.
Again, I get my drive, I get my excitement from being able to peek at the bottom and know that it's there, it's extraordinary, and we need to find it. And if I'm 80 years old and it hasn't been found, you'll know where to find me. I'll be out there looking for it.
The Hualapi Mountains in Arizona, am I right?
Yeah.
Church, no less.
That's it. I'll be in church on my knees looking at the rocks.
Well, congratulations. Ongoing activities searching for the Perseverance copper porphyry. It's been a pleasure to chat with you here. June 2019. Is there anything else that you had occurred to you or that you wanted to mention here?
I think you've done a good job reminding me of what we've got to offer and what we've got coming up in the near future.
Thank you. And hopefully reminding all the kinds of people who will get a chance to see this online too. Some of these conversations are always a challenge, right? There's so much to talk about. Talked a little bit about the recent news releases, but there's ones prior to that as well. I'd encourage anybody who's still got questions or wants to get any clarification there, talk to the company directly. They believe it or not, this is what a capable junior mining exploration company looks like, as far as I can tell. It's a wild business. It's compared to working for one of the majors and stuff. Is there a second? Would you do more exploration on the other side of a discovery at Perseverance yourself, Tim? Or I wonder kind of what the future looks like for you.
Well, there are other places where opportunity exists. I like Arizona because it's a safe jurisdiction. It's a well-endowed jurisdiction geologically, and it's close to home. And there are other places here where Bell can get out, get something that nobody's thought about before, and stand just as good a chance to find another whatever we may end up finding at Perseverance.
Yeah.
So I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to the Congo anytime soon. We can do a lot of good for a lot of investors just by sticking to our knitting here in Arizona.
Wonderful. Mr. Tim Marsh, Bell Copper, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Peter.
Bye.
Core, you won't understand or see it bright like wires in the mine. I'm a copper mining man.